Hi, my name is Frank Caputo. Welcome to Drugs Are Us. This show is concerned with addictions and the family. My guest this evening is Dick Krafsick. Let's see, LCSW, LADC.
Right.
Dick is a psychotherapist and life coach and has been doing that for about 20 years. I personally known Dick for about 15 years. He's been my mentor many times, and we worked together in a couple of different settings. The reason I've asked Dick here tonight is because I'd like to investigate what a family does when they're able to identify that the person does have a substance abuse problem, whether it be alcohol or other drugs. So I guess I'll ask you, Dick, what might be some of the signs, or what might be something that would get a person involved to try to get help for an addict or an alcoholic if they identify that problem?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Frank, good question. Well, one of the things that family members especially, or even friends, if there isn't, say, close family ties, can be aware of are changes in the person's behavior. A person who is normally friendly and outgoing, or at least available to their friends or family, all of a sudden starts withdrawing from the family or friends. Maybe they're not taking care of themselves physically. They may be argumentative. They may seem like they're defensive, and this would be a change in their behavior. Mm-hmm. If they're ordinarily argumentative and defensive, well, then not change the behavior. So I suppose the converse would be true. If the person all of a sudden is very happy when they're usually quiet and not too outgoing, and all of a sudden they become very outgoing. So any radical changes in a person's behavior. Maybe a person is having difficulty sleeping. Sometimes, especially with drug addiction problems, phones will ring in the home at odd hours of the day or night, and when another family member answers, it'll be a hang-up. So you kind of wonder what's going on there. So there are signs like that. Maybe the person isn't able to go to work on a particular day because they're sick, and that's a natural thing to happen. But when it happens repeatedly, and even then, sometimes a spouse will cover up for the person and call in and say he's silly. In this case, I'll use a male figure because it's easier to, instead of going back and forth from he to she. But we'll call into his place of work and say he's sick, where maybe she knows he came home late and he seemed like he was hungover, and that this pattern continues. Maybe a person has some recent troubles with the law, with DUI, or getting in fights or things of that nature. So any radical change in the person's behavior is one way of identifying whether a person has a problem or not.
Just something other than the ordinary for that individual, their behaviors.
Yeah. And if there's a good relationship between the person and her spouse or his spouse, and he asks about it, gee, I'm concerned about you because it seems like there's something going on with it. Oh, no, nothing's wrong.
Right.
So there's like all of a sudden a pattern of denial, not denying that they have any kind of problem or that they want to talk about it. So those are some of the ways that a person can get an idea of whether their loved one is having some type of drug problem.
Well, if you're able to identify that this person does have a drug problem, I'm concerned about things that a family can do or should do or can't do and should or shouldn't do. I personally known of people that said, well, I'll flush his liquor down the sink and this way he won't have any more, which I don't think works most of the time. I'll remove his drugs. I will check everything in his room. And sometimes you may go out of your way. I believe there's a commercial on TV about a lady that supposedly does that and find out that it's wrong. What should a person do if somebody finds that somebody or identifies that somebody has a substance abuse problem and it's affecting he or she?
The tendency is to do a couple of things which are not necessarily the most helpful things when a person begins to suspect that their loved one is having a problem. And one is to do the kinds of things you're doing, you know, to go around dumping the alcohol down the toilet and but not saying anything. See?
Right.
Or calling the employer and saying, you know, he's sick and he can't come in today. In other words, what they call enabling the person.
Correct, right.
Because they don't want to confront the person. Okay. And I'm not suggesting that they should, because the other side of it is what happens is the person will go the other way and start accusing, you're drunk, or you did this, or you know, you're spending your money on drugs, or what are you doing? You're going to ruin the family. You're going to ruin your life. That kind of thing. And what that does is often puts the person on a defensive. That they'll either get defensive, withdrawn, or angry, or storm out. Sometimes, unfortunately, violent. So that's not a useful thing to do either. So it's the extremes, either covering up or heavily confronting the person. That's not going to help the situation. Okay.
Okay. Which I guess is kind of the normal way we try to deal with things.
Sure.
Sometimes is to intervene immediately and lay down the rules. From my experience, I know that the more things you tell addicts that they should or shouldn't do, the less it's going to sink in.
Yep.
So we've identified a problem. The person has a problem. Someone tells them the things not to do or shouldn't do, or they read a book that tells them that.
Right.
What would you do unless it's a crisis situation? I mean, obviously, if the person is lying on their bed and hardly breathing, you'll call an ambulance and you'll go to the hospital and they will deal with that crisis. But if that's not the case, what happens in a case like that? We see things. We've heard about interventions on TV. I mean, some of them, I guess, maybe a little exaggerated, but maybe not. How does that work, and how does a person go about doing something like that?
That's a good question. Yeah, and seeing it on TV, because I've seen this program on interventions on TV too, and it's a well done program, but it oversimplifies what goes into an intervention, and oversimplifies the way that you deal with the kind of problem you're talking about, where the person doesn't know what to do. You know, they try to confront the person. That doesn't do any good. They try to cover up or hide the booze or the drugs, or whatever it may be, and that doesn't help. It's always best to be open and honest with the spouse, with the loved one, with the friend, and letting them know, gee, I'm very concerned about you. I know you say you're not concerned, but I'm concerned, and I'm going to go see a counselor and talk about it. And often the spouse will say, well, if that's what you want to do, go ahead. And in that type of situation, it's helpful to seek out a person that's a professional interventionist. And the reason I say professional is because sometimes a family member will go to the library and get a book on intervention. And read up on it and decide, oh, so we bring these people together and we have a meeting, and we don't tell the person that we're going to do this. We don't tell our spouse, and all of a sudden we spring it on him. And he goes through this, and like on television, he starts to cry, and he says, okay, I'll go get whatever help is necessary. It doesn't work that simply. Because very often what happens is when the family tries to do this on their own, it ends up in arguing, it ends up in accusations, it ends up in the person storming out. And even in professional interventions, which I've done, it can end up in the person storming out. And then there's a question of deciding, well, what do you do in that type of case? So anyway, the point I'm making is it does certainly help to have professional intervention. In other words, to have a session with somebody that knows how an intervention works and what they need to do. Now, once that has happened, once it's been explained to the person what an intervention is all about, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. If this, in this case, let's say the woman, and the man has the problem. Obviously, it works the other way around sometimes too. Goes back and tells her husband about it and says, I went to see this counselor, and it sounds like there is a problem, and something needs to be done about it before it gets worse. And the spouse says, okay, well, I'll go with you then to a meeting with the counselor. If that's the case, then that may be the best of all possible worlds, where he goes with her to a counselor and they talk about it and they come to some decision as to what needs to be done. But if that's not the case, if he doesn't want anything about it, okay,
Right.
well then she knows she needs to go the next step because everything seems to be going along the same way. He's coming home late. Sometimes he comes home hungover, or if it's drug addiction, there may be all kinds of abnormal expenditures coming out of the checking
Right.
account where there's no basis, because some of these drugs are very expensive, like cocaine and so on. So anyway, she gets back with the interventionist and goes through some further discussion about what an intervention is all about. And what the interventionist, professional interventionist, will tell her, well, it's certainly helpful to have anywhere from 6 to 8 people. Any more than that may get a little unwieldy, but maybe not. And these 6 to 8 people should be people who have a relationship with her husband. It could be family members. It could be an employer. Could be a best friend.
Someone significant in their life.
Someone significant in their life, but someone that also thinks positively of this person and is not out to zing them. Because the worst thing you can do is have, like in a discussion with the wife, in this case, discussing with the interventionist who should or shouldn't be part of the intervention. When a discussion about a particular person comes up and she says, you know, my sister really hates my husband because she knows he's been drinking a lot and there's disruption in the family, and boy, I can't wait to let him know about it. Well, she may not be the person to be in the intervention.
Right.
So what happens is with an actual intervention, a professionally done intervention, usually there's 3 sessions, at least the interventions I've done, where you get together with the family and friends, and you do a training session with them. Training in terms of what intervention is all about.
Kind of like a dress rehearsal?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
But before it even gets to that, these people need the opportunity just to open up and talk about their concerns, talk about what's been happening and so on, what they're worried about. And the trained interventionist will listen to them so that he gets a good picture of what's been happening. You know, that he's been coming home late every night, and that he's very argumentative and sometimes even potentially abusive, missing work, those kinds of things, not taking care of himself physically. Or on the drug side of it, he comes home and he's sky high and you know, just the world is wonderful, and or he starts to get paranoid. Any of those kinds of symptoms. So anyway, it's helpful that the other people that are involved in the intervention understand what some of the things that the family has been seeing take place, because maybe they haven't been seeing this so much. And this could be a neighbor too. A neighbor that's been very friendly with the person, but then, you know, wonders why the person hasn't been out working on the yard or talking to him lately. So anyway, they're given the opportunity just to listen to this, listen to the spouse, listen to the family members, and then ask questions of their own. And then once that happens, and once the interventionist feels that now these people at least understand what's been happening, where do you go from here with this? Well, they're trained that there's a part A and a part B of an intervention. And with the watchword being that they want to preserve this person's dignity. Not that they want to cover up for the person, but they want to preserve their dignity. They don't want to attack the person.
Right.
But on the other hand, they also want the person to know what it is they're concerned about. So they start out with part B. Part B is going to each person, and again, this is the training now, going to each person in the group and saying, look, what are some of the special things that you've experienced about Bill? Okay, using Bill in this case. And maybe the neighbor says, well, gee, I like the fact that he and I talk about gardening. We get together, we talk about gardening, and we just talk about you know, things that are happening in town and happening in the neighborhood. And that hasn't been happening for some, you know, because probably Bill's been drugging or drinking. And the neighbor says, I really enjoy my time with Bill, and he's a great guy. He's very family oriented. So that's the part B. Next, we go to the next person, and that person may be an employer, who who is willing to participate because he's always valued Bill as an employee for a number of years. And so the interventionist may ask, what is it about Bill that has caused you to want him to stay with you for 20 years, And he said, well, he's always been a loyal employee. He gets his work done. He's really part of the company, and you just get the impression when you talk with Bill that you're fortunate to have him as an employee. The concern is lately Bill has been coming in late, he hasn't been finishing his work, and so on and so forth. But first of all, getting to the positives about Bill. So in other words, the part B that everybody in that little group of 6 or 8 people focus on, what are the special important things about Bill that they want him to know, that they're aware of and they appreciate. Okay. Then, and usually we tell them to put these things down on paper so you don't forget. Almost like you're writing a letter to Bill.
Right.
You're not going to give Bill a letter, but write it down so you remember. And then, as a matter of fact, put B next to it. Okay. Right. Now we get into part A. Okay. Yes. And part A is, that same neighbor saying, well, I guess I'm concerned because all of a sudden Bill just stopped going out to the yard. Frankly, his yard looks like hell. It's, he didn't keep up the garden. The property is all covered with leaves. Whatever, they're blowing into my yard. Right. That kind of thing. Right. That the wife, who has really had the opportunity during that initial session to talk about all the things she's concerned about, that she lets the other people know too.
Right.
And
let me just,
sure.
Each person in the group is aware of what the other person is going to be saying positive about this individual.
Exactly.
Or negative about
or
this.
negative, right.
I mean, not negative, but
well, when the
what's
intervention
different.
takes place,
right.
but not necessarily until they have this session.
Okay.
See? And the session about the concerns on the part of the wife and the family members, because chances are friends or employer or whomever else, clergyman that's really a person that Bill relates to, hasn't heard this, okay, that they know, what some of the problems and concerns on the part of the family and the wife is. So they've all heard the positives, the part B, and they also hear the part A from each person too. So now, then the interventionist lets them know that it's very important that they put these things down on paper. Now, some interventionists call it a love letter. Now, it may sound a little schmaltzy, a love letter, but it may be the first time that this person has heard something like that, so that they can feel good about themselves. Because you see, there may be something going on in this person's life that none of these folks, including the wife, are aware of. So,
True.
And we can get into the whole, which we don't have time to do now, the whole dynamics of addiction, how a person becomes addicted, and how there's a change in the brain chemistry and the strong cravings a person has.
We'll have another show on that. That's no problem.
Okay. Well, anyway, so that usually takes place over a couple of days, maybe 3 or 4 hours a day, because there's even a specific way that it's suggested they construct these letters, we call them, okay? And to do the part B first, okay, and then do the part A. And that would be the actual way that you'd present to the person. Then comes the day of the intervention. And what we usually advise people to do is to let the person know that there's going to be a meeting at which she is going and she'd like him to come and hear some of the things that this person they've been talking to has come up with. At the same time, we've done interventions in in rectories and parishes. We've done them in hotels. We've done them in private homes. Less in private homes. It's probably better to do it at a neutral setting.
location.
But anyway, I've gone to New York to do them, and so on and so forth. And many times it's involved people all over the country. I've done interventions where people who live in California and were in Connecticut flew in. I've done them where maybe a person, a family member, couldn't come, but they wanted to participate. So we talked over the phone, and they gave me the Part B and A on the phone. And then I had another family member read
Report on
this.
that, so to speak.
So now the day or the evening or whatever of the intervention itself, and you had another question, or?
No, go ahead. That's fine. Continue. No, that's fine.
Yeah,
No.
okay. Well,
the day of the intervention.
Yeah, the day of the intervention itself, as I say, it could be any different number of different kinds of places, you know. We're here in this room, and the spouse brings her husband in. What are you people doing here, you know? And that's where it's important to have a professional there.
Yeah.
Because that professional can say, look, Bill, we're asking you here to help us out. We'd like you to listen to the folks here, but you'll also get a chance to talk about your thoughts and feelings about the situation. But if we can agree at least tentatively to listen to each other before we say anything. Can we agree to that, Bill? And the professional works with the person to get him at least to that level of agreement. And then what happens is the room is set up, just backtracking a bit, during that training phase where we just got together with the family members and the friends. We have them sit in certain places. And maybe the person that's closest to Bill, and it may be a son, maybe a neighbor, maybe a friend, maybe the clergyman, we have that person sit right next to him. Maybe the wife would be across. It depends. But we structure this so people are sitting in a certain place.
There's a reason.
And then the day or night of the intervention comes, and we've gotten this agreement with Bill. Again, you know, Bill's not too excited about it, obviously, but at least he's reluctantly agreed to listen.
Right.
And the first person gives the B. Bill, you know, I know you. I've known you for a long time. You're a real good friend. We used to go out a lot fishing, and we went to baseball games and so on. All that seemed to have stopped, and I miss being with you. You're a great guy. You've always been there for me. Okay. Now I'll tell you what I'm concerned about. I haven't witnessed this myself, but I've heard people talk about the fact that you've been doing a lot of drink. Oh no. So the interventionist jumps in. Just hear him out. Just hear him out. You don't necessarily have to agree. So he gives down the litany of things about A that he, as a friend, is concerned about. You go around the whole circle of people. Sometimes it's helpful to have a child involved. I was in one intervention where there was, I think it was a 9-year-old son who, 9-year-old daughter, who was very concerned about the fact that her father would always come to her basketball games, but lately when he came, he was coming drunk, and he was raising hell from the stands and calling attention to himself and so on and so forth. And after the game, she would cry, and she went to her coach and told her coach about it. So anyway, that's one of the things that the daughter gives her Part B about how much she loves her father, how much she loves to have him come to the basketball games, how much she misses his coming. But then she goes into the A part, that you really embarrass me. You want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, this all seems to come from love, so to speak. In other words, a person, when they're sitting there, knows that they're loved, but there are exceptions that
Right.
that are occurring here that are making these people upset and concerned about it.
Exactly.
Not because they hate him because he's an evil person,
Right.
but because what's going on, his behaviors are affecting their behaviors, and they're being assertive but not aggressive in this case. Okay.
And see, with the Part B, excuse me, with the Part A, at the end of the Part A, the group knows to say to the person, and I hope you'll take the help that's being offered to you today. And they can either say at that point what they know that it is, or let the last person do it, whatever it may be. So anyway, then they've gone around the whole group, and people have expressed their thoughts in both Part A and Part B. Then it's Bill's turn. Very often, I found in about 90% of the cases that by the time you get 3/4 of the way through it, this guy is crying. He's
I would imagine.
very emotional, upset, and starting to cut through the denial. Look, I especially when he hears his daughter. See. But it could be best friend, it could be wife, whomever. Now, there has to be some kind of consequence involved if the person doesn't accept the help. Well, what kind of consequence? Well, I recall one intervention where the wife had Bill's, it wasn't this Bill, but the wife had the bag packed. That is a bag for his going to an inpatient rehab. And he didn't notice, but she had another bag on the other side. And he said, well, I'm not going, I don't need help. She picked up her bag, she said, I'm out of here.
Okay.
And she went and ran out the door, and he ran out the door, and he started to cry. No. So he knew she was serious. So I'm not saying that would necessarily be the one way, but even with this tough love kind of thing, that doesn't always work, where you're going to kick the person out of the house if they, continue to use. Because again, now, you've also prepared as the group to arrange with either an inpatient rehab, and we don't have time today to get into, or a counseling center, or even an individual therapist to get that person the help they need. As a matter of fact, you give them a couple of choices.
So the bottom line in this, and we don't have a lot more time, is that you approach this with love. You have people that are actually saying what they're saying. It's not an act. It's not something that they're trying to impress the person with, but it's truth. There's a professional involved in this thing. No one in that room is someone, with the exception of the facilitator, that doesn't know this person and cares about this person significantly in their life. So, but ultimately, the choice is going to be up to them. As you say, this is the situation. We want you to go into this detox facility. We want you to go to a rehab facility, whatever the case may be. Knowing that it's not going to actually cure him, but it's a beginning of the process.
It's the beginning of the process,
and following that, if the person does refuse, then it's got to be a situation where there are consequences and something has to be done. So the person that goes into this process has to understand too, I'm saying that if the person doesn't want to go along with it, they still have to take some action on their own. They don't just throw up their hands and say, well, okay, well, we tried and continue. There's got to be something which is good.
Like the spouse, for example, she may go into Al-Anon to take care of herself. Say, well, you're going to continue to do that, then I've got to take care of myself, whatever it may be. Now, just to understand, we don't live always in the best of all possible worlds, yet 90% of them work out. Sometimes the person just absolutely refuses to go. I've seen situations where the person may refuse in September and then just go back in their merry way, and all of a sudden realize in December, I think those people are right, I do need some help.
Well, you're planting a seed, and somewhere down the line a person's going to identify it. Because it's ultimately a choice that they gets at the end anyway. So
because the final analysis, it is that person's choice.
Well, Dick, I want to thank you. I wish we had some more time to speak about these things, but you're always welcome to come back with another subject too, hopefully in the future. Thank you very much for everything that's here, and hopefully we're able to communicate to the people out there that it is a family disease, and it does affect all the members of the family. And when the identified person realizes that, perhaps it's better for them than to try to yell and scream and dump the booze down the toilet. Thank you, Dick. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.